Did your town ever have any stories like the one about the deserted cottage in the forest or the street where people claim to see ghosts all the time? Mine did. The cabin story. It was a tale passed around when we were kids. Just south of the old school building, hidden in the woods, there was said to be a cabin that had been left abandoned long ago. The rumor was that some awful killings had taken place there many years back, and since then, no one had dared to return. But if no one had gone back, how did anyone know what had happened? It was something that sparked our childhood imaginations. One summer, the story popped into my head while I was hanging out with my friends, feeling restless. Our little town didn't offer much entertainment, especially before the days of smartphones. With a population of barely 150 people, there weren't many ways to keep busy as a teenager. So we came up with an exciting idea. We were going to find that cabin. We packed up everything we thought we'd need, eager for the adventure. The only problem was that, in our rush, we hadn't noticed how late it had gotten, and by then, the sun had already set. Realizing we couldn't go at night, we agreed to meet in the morning and try again. The next day, we gathered behind the old schoolhouse and began our trek. There seemed to be a faint path leading into the trees, probably an old trail from years ago. It was barely visible and eventually disappeared completely. Since there was no clear way forward, we tried to walk in what we thought was a straight line. One of my friends, always a bit cautious, started marking trees with chalk so we could find our way back. A smart idea, but there were so many trees that I doubted it would actually help. After walking for about 2.5 hours, we started feeling discouraged. The rumor was that the cabin was only an hour's walk south, so we feared we had passed it by a long shot. When you're 15 and easily bored, a long walk with no sign of your goal can be pretty frustrating. Just as we were about to give up, my friend suddenly shouted. He had spotted what looked like an old, forgotten trail, only slightly overgrown. He was excited because a few rocks along the way hadn't been covered by grass. We followed what we hoped was the right path, and after about 20 more minutes, we finally stumbled upon the cabin. We couldn't believe it. We had actually found the legendary place, the infamous cabin in the woods. Overwhelmed with excitement, my friend pulled out his camera and began taking pictures. We were thrilled, jumping around in disbelief. Now, the real test, seeing inside the cabin. Every door and window had been sealed up with wooden boards. We walked around the entire structure, searching for an entry point, but every possible way in was shut tight. Just when we thought we wouldn't be able to go inside, one of my friends noticed a small window that looked like it could be forced open. He tugged at it, and to our surprise, it swung up. The opening was tiny, too small for most of us to fit through, but our friend Jake was skinny enough to squeeze in. We shined a flashlight inside. The floor was just dirt, and we could barely make out a staircase leading down. We assured Jake that we'd pull him back up if needed. He cautiously slipped inside, struggling slightly with his shoulders. Once in, he slowly climbed up the creaky stairs. Then we realized a big flaw in our plan. Since all the windows and doors were still boarded up, there was no way for him to remove them from the inside. Thankfully, we found a kitchen window that hadn't been secured properly. With enough effort, we managed to pry it open and climb in one by one. Inside, the place looked like it had been untouched for decades. Dishes were still sitting in the sink, covered in black grime. Old shoes were scattered on the floor, and faded decorations still hung on the walls, hidden under layers of dust. What intrigued us the most was the second floor. It felt like the forbidden part of the cabin. The stairs worried us. They looked unstable, and we feared they might collapse. To be safe, we had Jake go up first, testing each step carefully. Once he reached the top, we followed one at a time. The upper floor had only 2 rooms, both long abandoned. No signs of blood or anything gruesome, which was odd for a place called the Murder Cabin. Maybe someone dangerous had lived there, but nothing indicated a crime scene. We checked out the rooms, old beds, wooden cabinets, moth-eaten clothes. Nothing too interesting. Then something caught my eye. A glint of light reflected from under one of the beds. I knelt down and saw what looked like an old metallic object with faint writing on it, too faded to read. As I reached for it and started to sit up, I suddenly heard 2 words whispered right in my ear. "Get out." The voice was unmistakably female. The problem? There wasn't a single girl with us. I froze. My heart pounded as I quickly looked around. No one was there. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. I left the object where it was and hurried downstairs. Climbing back through the kitchen window, I was the first one out. I had no desire to stay inside any longer. One by one, my friends lost interest in exploring and followed me out. We all agreed the place was unsettling and decided it was time to leave. Before heading back, we did our best to put the board over the kitchen window again, hammering the nails back in with a rock. We figured we'd leave it almost as we found it, for the next group of kids brave enough to seek it out. As we walked away, I took one last glance at the cabin. In the upstairs window, the very room where I had been so shaken, I saw something. Just for a split second, I could swear I saw a face staring at me. Then it disappeared. Was it real? Was it just my imagination? My friends didn't mention seeing anything, so I kept it to myself. To this day, I have no idea what I saw or heard. I'm a skeptic by nature, but seeing a ghost in broad daylight? I don't know what to believe. I try not to think about it too much, not even during my brother's bachelor party. When I was 14, we took a trip to visit my grandparents, who lived in a small wooden house deep in the forest, near a quiet pond. The mornings there were breathtaking, and since there was no internet, just an old television from the early 90s with a handful of channels and a VHS player, I invited my friend to come along to keep me company. My grandmother was a big horror fan, so she had a collection of spooky VHS tapes. The cabin was about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town and around 6 hours from our home. The journey there was fun, and we finally arrived around 9 p.m. My friend and I were excited. I jumped out of the car, ran to hug my grandparents, and they led us to our room upstairs. It was spacious, with a single bed, a small bathroom, and a balcony overlooking the water. Since it was winter, the nights were snowy and cold. I tend to overheat when I sleep, so I like to crack a window or door open for some fresh air. After opening our bedroom window, I went downstairs to grab our bags. My dad handed us our things, and my friend took them up while I sat in the kitchen, waiting for my grandmother to finish making hot chocolate. I asked if we could watch a movie before bed, and she agreed, reminding us not to turn the volume up too high. After we ate, drank our hot chocolate, and took turns showering, my parents and grandparents had already gone to sleep. My friend and I rummaged through the stack of VHS tapes and decided on Friday the 13th. We enjoyed the late-night movie, but afterward we were exhausted. I shut the door and we went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up around 8 a.m., hurried downstairs for breakfast, and got ready for a walk. The snow-covered landscape was beautiful under the bright sun, though the air was still a bit chilly. We asked my grandparents and dad if we could go on the hiking trail, and they agreed, warning us to stay on the path. My grandmother even packed a small bag with snacks and soda in case we got hungry. After finishing our food, we set off on our walk. The trail wound through the forest, and we took our time, enjoying the peaceful scenery. About an hour in, I sat on a rock to have a snack, and my friend joined me. Suddenly, we heard a strange, loud noise coming from deeper in the woods. We exchanged looks before standing up and heading toward the sound. A few minutes later, we spotted something unusual: red stains on the snow. At first, I assumed it was just an animal, maybe a fox catching a rabbit. We continued walking, but then we heard a voice, a girl calling out for help. "Hello? Is anyone there?" We froze. My friend immediately became uneasy and said we should turn back, but I insisted that someone might be lost and needed help. We hesitated for a moment, then cautiously moved toward where the voice had come from. The forest had gone eerily silent, but we started calling out, "Hello? Where are you?" Like reckless teenagers do, the voice called out again. This time, we ran in its direction. In my rush, I tripped over a rock and fell into the snow, making my friend laugh. As I dusted myself off, she suddenly pointed ahead. There was a cabin. We approached, thinking maybe someone inside needed help. The door creaked as we stepped in, revealing a mess: old shoes, clothes, and undergarments scattered around. Plates with rotting food sat on the table, covered in cobwebs. The place had clearly been abandoned for a long time. We cautiously explored further, stepping into a back room that sent chills down my spine. Chains were bolted to the walls, and in the center was a bed with leather straps attached. Dried stains marked the walls and floor. We were about to turn and run when a soft voice made our blood turn to ice. "Help me!" A girl stood in the doorway staring at us. Panic took over, and we bolted out of the cabin, running as fast as we could until we reached the hiking trail. We didn't stop running until we were back home. Afraid of getting in trouble, we decided not to tell our parents or grandparents what we had seen. Instead, we went up to our room, tried to distract ourselves with movies, and agreed to pretend it never happened. That night, exhaustion took over and we went to bed early. But in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a scream. My friend was standing by the balcony. I whispered harshly, "Why did you scream? My parents are going to be mad." She turned to me, her face pale. "That wasn't me," she said. "It was her. She's down by the water." I hesitated, then stepped closer. Below, by the lake, stood the same girl we had seen earlier. But she wasn't alone. More girls stood beside her, all looking up at us, all crying out for help. Terrified, I shut the balcony door, and we backed away. Just then, my dad and mom rushed in, asking why we were crying. My grandmother followed closely behind. We told them everything, what we had seen during our walk, the abandoned cabin, the girl. My grandmother's expression changed instantly. She sat us down and told us the truth. Years ago, there had been a series of kidnappings in the area. A man had taken girls, locked them away in that cabin, and done horrific things to them before ending their lives. He had been caught and imprisoned, but the bodies of his victims were never found. To this day, I wonder, were they trying to tell us something? Did they need our help? Or were they just lost souls, searching for peace? No one deserves to be forgotten like that. I never wanted to go in the first place. Let me take you back about 6 years. My girlfriend had this idea that she absolutely had to rent a cabin deep in the forest. Camping was a firm no from her, considering it was just a flimsy tent between us and nature. But a cabin? A solid wooden shelter? That she could handle. After weeks of her raving about how amazing it would be, I finally caved and agreed. It was supposed to be an unforgettable getaway in a cozy log cabin. It took a few weeks to organize, but eventually, we loaded up the car and set off for the trip. The drive itself took 5 hours, followed by an hour-long trek through rough terrain in our vehicle just to reach this so-called dream cabin. If I'm being honest, she mostly chose this place because of how nice it looked in pictures. But when we arrived, it was clear the photos had been taken a long time ago. What was once a picturesque retreat had become neglected and run down. It was obvious no one had properly maintained it in years. The whole thing was a massive letdown. As you'd expect, neither of us was thrilled, but after such a long journey, we were too tired to complain. Plus, we'd already paid for 2 nights, and there was no way we were getting our money back. So we figured we'd just deal with it and get some rest. That's when I noticed something that really unsettled me. The sheets on the bed looked like they hadn't been changed in ages. It was one thing for the cabin to be old, but it was another thing entirely for it to be filthy. Making things worse, when we checked our phones, there was no signal. Frustrated, we pulled off the sheets and just slept directly on the mattress. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but that wasn't the worst part. The real issue was the noises. I wasn't expecting it, but as I lay there, struggling to sleep, I kept hearing sounds, like small creatures scurrying around above us. The way the cabin was built, there was a crawl space in the ceiling, but as far as I could tell, there wasn't supposed to be access to it from inside our rental. We had brought a flashlight with us, and my girlfriend, who wanted absolutely nothing to do with whatever was making the noise, stayed in bed while I got up to investigate. I looked around for some kind of opening or hatch, but honestly wasn't thrilled about the idea of coming face to face with a wild animal in the dark. After searching for a while, I found nothing. We decided to just ignore it and try to sleep through the sounds above our heads. The next morning, we got up, got ready, and went out for one of those amazing hikes my girlfriend had been so excited about. And to be fair, the hike itself was fantastic. Lack of sleep aside, I'd recommend getting outdoors like that to anyone. It was refreshing. After about 7 hours of trekking through the wilderness, we returned to the cabin, exhausted but in good spirits. We kicked off our boots, joked around, and flirted a bit, until we noticed something that instantly killed the mood. Our food, which had been neatly packed in a corner of the tiny kitchen, had been tampered with. There wasn't a lot of it, so it didn't take up much space, but now some of it was missing. The cabin door had been locked, something the owner said wasn't strictly necessary since the place was so remote, but we decided to do it anyway, just in case of wildlife. Yet somehow our food was gone, and it wasn't like an animal had raided it. There were no bite marks or ripped packaging. No, someone had carefully opened the food wrappers in a way that wouldn't be obvious. The only problem? We'd been looking forward to our granola bars when we got back, and now, half the box was missing. We noticed right away. That's when the unease really set in. In our heads, the realization was clear. Someone had been inside. Then, I remembered the noises from the night before. Suddenly, everything started making sense. Was it possible that some stranger, some unhinged person, was living in the cabin without anyone knowing? Had we unknowingly stepped into their space, and now they were sneaking around while we were out? The thought made my stomach drop. My girlfriend and I spoke in hushed tones, suddenly feeling like we were being watched. It was an eerie sensation, like the walls had ears, like whoever had been there might still be close by. I had no idea how far we'd have to drive to get a cell signal, but my mind was racing, and after a tense discussion, we decided we weren't staying another night. We started packing our things as quickly and quietly as possible. That's when I noticed something else was missing. My wallet. That was it. I was furious. Not only had this intruder taken our food, but now my wallet too. What the hell were they planning to do? It was a 2-hour drive back to the nearest town. Where exactly were they thinking of going with it? I knew we had to confront them. We already had a strong suspicion they were hiding in the crawl space above us. But how could we get up there? We stepped outside and walked around the cabin, and that's when we saw it. A small hatch at the back of the building, slightly open, propped up by a stick. More confirmation that someone was living up there. Slowly, I built up the nerve to open the hatch. Flashlight in hand, I pried it open and shined the light inside. What I saw made my skin crawl. In the corner of the crawl space, crouched in the darkness, was a small, wiry man. His eyes gleamed in the beam of my flashlight, and when the light hit him, he let out a noise. Something between a squeak and a gasp. I'm not gonna lie, I nearly lost it right there. But I held my ground and demanded that he throw down my wallet. I didn't care about the cash, he could keep that. I just wanted the damn wallet back. To my surprise, after a moment's hesitation, he tossed it down. I caught it, but it felt dirty, grimy, like it had been handled too much. We didn't waste another second. We threw the rest of our things into the car and sped out of there. The moment we got enough signal, we called the owner and told him everything. He was apologetic, said he had no idea anyone was up there, and promised to send the authorities to handle it. We didn't ask for a refund. We didn't ask for anything. We just wanted to get as far away as possible. But the thing that still haunts me to this day isn't just the fact that someone was living above us while we slept. It's the fact that we locked the door. So how the hell did he get inside? I went to camp with my friend Jake, and we were assigned to the same cabin. We stayed awake until we couldn't keep our eyes open anymore and finally went to sleep. Jake and I had sneaked into the kitchen earlier and grabbed a few packets of instant coffee. We mixed them with water and drank them late at night. Unlike me, Jake wasn't used to caffeine, so while I eventually dozed off, he remained awake after everyone else had fallen asleep. Curious, I asked what he was doing. He told me he had brought a book and planned to read until he felt tired. Everything was calm until around 1 a.m. when a sudden, ear-piercing scream jolted us awake. Jake was trembling and crying inside his sleeping bag, and within seconds, The entire cabin crowded around him to find out what had happened. His scream had been so loud that even if it hadn't woken up other cabins and the camp staff, his sobbing afterwards certainly did. When the teachers rushed into our cabin, I had to stay on my top bunk to avoid getting crushed by the chaos. Shaken, Jake finally managed to explain. He had seen a ghost wandering near our cabin. He claimed that as it moved, he could hear the wind whooshing around it. One of the other guys in our cabin looked at him and said he had also heard that eerie sound. After that night, Jake was sent home, while the rest of us stayed at camp. But the atmosphere felt strange after what had happened. When I saw him again after camp, we talked a lot, and he shared more details about what he had seen. It was unsettling because Jake was one of the most honest people I knew, and he seemed deeply disturbed by the experience. I wondered if the coffee had played a role, but we had some the night before as well, and nothing unusual had happened then. Plus, Jake regularly drank coffee just because he liked the taste, even though it kept him up at night. He described how, when he first spotted the ghost, he froze for 3 whole seconds, unable to react. It wasn't like how ghosts appear in movies, it was barely visible, almost transparent. The most unnerving thing was that it looked like a young boy, but he wasn't wearing our school's uniform. Instead, his clothes were extremely old-fashioned. At first, Jake wasn't exactly scared, just completely shocked. But then, after those 3 seconds, when he finally screamed, the ghost boy slowly turned his head toward him. His eyes were hollow and lifeless, and the moment he made eye contact, he darted out of the cabin. That was the gust of wind that Jake and the other guy had heard. I remember exactly what Jake told me because if I had been in his place, I would have questioned everything too. He said that for the brief second the ghost stared at him, it felt like time had stopped. He knew his mind wasn't playing tricks on him because when he saw those eyes, he understood there was nothing human left inside them. It was as if the boy's soul had been drained away. The way Jake described it terrified me, and I felt awful for him. That was all he ever shared about the incident, and to this day, I don't think he will ever go camping again. My mom and 2 older brothers used to visit my aunt and 3 cousins around the holiday season. The whole family would gather, uncles, aunts, you name it. They lived up near Aberdeen, Scotland, in a place called the Dark Highlands. Technically, it was in a little village called Cromarty, but Aberdeen was more widely recognized. The Dark Highlands had long been rumored to be a meeting place for witches on Halloween, where they supposedly carried out sinister rituals and animal offerings. That was all said to have happened many years ago, though, and whether there was any truth to it was another question. Our family gathering was set to take place in a vacation lodge we had rented not far from my cousin's home. It had several bedrooms, making it ideal for a group stay. My older brother, his friend from Ghana, and I were all sharing one room. They were both sound asleep, but I was not. I woke up suddenly, unsure of what had disturbed me. Rubbing my blurry eyes, I scanned the dimly lit room. All I could hear was the rhythmic breathing and occasional snores from my brother and his friend. Then, the door creaked open, ever so slowly. I swear, my entire body locked up in fear. Nothing seemed to enter, yet when I strained my eyes to see, I started noticing dark, shadowy shapes shifting and floating near the beds. 3 of them, at least 2, hovered over my brother and his friend, while the 3rd stood over me. These figures weren't like people, not really. They had vague human-like outlines, but no features, no faces, just shadows moving and pulsing. Even without eyes, I could feel it staring straight at me. I made a split-second decision. Turn my back, face the wall, and force myself to sleep. The next morning, I shared what had happened with a few family members. They laughed, suggesting it was probably old tales of witches coming to life, and brushed it off as nonsense. All except one person, my brother's girlfriend. She had been in the room next door and had her own unsettling experience. She said she woke in the night feeling as if someone had sat down on her bed. She could even feel the weight pressing against her legs. Yet, when she looked, there was no one there. Disturbed by all this, I decided to check the guest book to see if any previous visitors had written about anything strange. But there was nothing. I'll never forget that night. And if you ever find yourself up near the dark highlands, or staying in that old holiday lodge, be careful. You never know what might come creeping in after dark. I had just moved into my great-uncle's old cabin, which he left me after I wrapped up a job call. On my second night, I had an incredibly vivid dream. In it, all my scars were gone, and I was happily married to my high school crush, what I had always imagined as the perfect life. In the dream, we had a pet, a bobcat to be exact. When I woke up that morning and looked into the forest, I saw a bobcat standing there. But its shadow was all wrong. It was twice my height, with long human-like arms and a head shaped like a triangle. The following night, I had another dream. This time, my mom had made her famous stuffed peppers filled with tofu and mushrooms, and I was eating them while watching the Star Wars sequels. The bobcat was curled up on my lap, fast asleep. That morning, when I spotted the bobcat again, I shouted at it. I told it that I could see through the illusion. The only thing in that dream that wasn't tainted was my mother. I had tricked it, and that confirmed what I had feared. It was trying to deceive me. The next dream was a nightmare. It wasn't as detailed as the others, but it was unmistakably real. I was attacked over and over by people I cared about. I never fought back, but I also never allowed the bobcat to help me. The dream after that was worse. The forest itself turned against me. Trees moved, roots crushed my home, and my entire family was wiped away. For the first time, the entity spoke. "You will be my echo. It has already been decided. I can either bring blessings to you and your loved ones or curse every generation that follows. The choice is yours." It waited for my answer, but I gave none. We sat facing each other for what felt like forever. Then, suddenly, I woke up to my friend shaking me. Panicked. I had been unconscious for nearly 3 days. After that, the dreams kept coming. Some were of a perfect life. Others were nightmares beyond imagination. It was like something was raging inside my mind, frustrated that I wasn't playing along. One day, while out hunting geese, I came across the bobcat again. It didn't run. It just followed me through the woods. I knew these woods like the back of my hand. I had hunted here for years, long before moving into the cabin. But that day, I kept getting lost. The whole time, the bobcat trailed behind me. Respect be damned, I thought, and raised my gun. I shot it in the head. The creature nearly disintegrated, leaving behind just a thin strip of flesh hanging from its chest. But it didn't react. It didn't flinch. And after that, the strange dreams stopped. I was out hiking with a few of my friends, trekking along some trails near a small mountain town. Out of curiosity, we decided to veer off the main path and follow some animal trails to see what we might find. After about an hour of wandering, we figured it was time to head back, but after making so many twists and turns, we quickly realized we were lost. We started making our way in what we thought was the direction of the main trail when we stumbled upon a clearing with an old, crumbling cabin. Being young and reckless, we naturally decided to check it out. The front door was barely hanging on and actually fell off when we tried to push it open. The floor was so weak that parts of it gave way as we stepped inside. There was a filthy, rotting mattress covered in mold, scattered dishes left in odd places, and in one of the rooms, we found what looked like a very ancient radio. Deeper inside, we came across the fully decomposed remains of what seemed to be a dog or possibly a coyote. After looking around for a bit, we decided to make our way back to the main trail before nightfall so we could set up camp and avoid getting lost again. We've returned about 5 times since then, but strangely, we've never been able to find that cabin again. I used to go to a camp in northern Ontario where for 1 week you'd stay with a group of kids doing activities, and then the next week you'd go on a canoe trip. I slept on the top bunk in the corner of a cabin with about 5 other bunks, all taken. The counselor had a bed behind a curtain off to the side. One night, or maybe early morning, around 1 to 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. I glanced toward the bunks and saw a figure hunched over in the middle of the cabin, lit by the moonlight. It stood about 5 feet tall, had a sharp, pointed face, long fingers, and oddly shaped feet. It looked like some kind of goblin. It moved slowly, sniffing around each kid sleeping on the lower bunks. I was frozen in place. I don't think it realized there were kids in the top bunks. After a while, it opened the door, stepped outside, and knocked over the fire barrel. That's when I heard the counselors calling out, warning about the barrel. Ironically, too late. That's when it really hit me. The counselor had been in bed the whole time. Even now, in my late 30s, I still wonder what that thing was looking for. It seemed like it wanted a kid who was awake. But for what? I have no idea. There have always been stories about children disappearing from certain places, so who knows? Needless to say, I never went back. Any thoughts? I'm not a skeptic. I've seen ghosts before, but I'd love to know what the hell that thing was. That happened to be a trip to the woods. A bunch of his buddies had booked a lodge in Yellowstone for a 3-day stay. On the first night, I noticed something strange in the room my cousin and I were sharing. As soon as we lay down, the ceiling started making loud creaking sounds, almost like someone was pacing back and forth above us. I brushed it off, assuming it was just the wood adjusting to the cold or maybe some small animals scurrying across the roof, and went to sleep. By the third night, though, I knew this wasn't something that could be explained away so easily. That evening, I went to bed before the others, who were still up, playing cards and having drinks. Just as expected, the creaking noises began again. I tried to tune them out as usual, but then one of the old brass wall decorations started rattling and scraping against the wall. I couldn't come up with any reasonable explanation for that. Shifts in temperature and other ordinary causes didn't make sense in this case. But I was exhausted, so I turned over and did my best to ignore it, until I suddenly felt something grip my arm. Without making a fuss, I just muttered, "Nope," deciding I wasn't about to deal with whatever restless spirit was hanging around. A few seconds later, I heard the ceiling creaking again, this time in the room further down the hall. I was around 8 or 9 years old when this happened. Across from the old battlefield, most nights while everyone was asleep, I could hear a woman softly humming. I was the only woman in the house. At the time, I slept on the couch, and many times, it felt like someone was slamming into it with full force. My fears were confirmed when one day, I heard voices outside my front window. When I looked out, I saw a local ghost tour had stopped, with people sitting on the porch discussing my house. I never listened in on what they were saying, but the whole thing was unsettling. I don't know if this is as frightening as other ghost stories, but it definitely shook me. It left me wondering what exactly had happened in my cabin or on this land. He tied the knot for the first time in his late 30s. For their honeymoon, he, his wife, and her daughter, who has special needs and is an amazing kid, by the way, took a trip to a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. After arriving, they unpacked their belongings and got settled in for a 3-night stay. On the last night, my cousin was up late watching television. His wife and stepdaughter had already gone to bed when he realized he needed to use the bathroom. He got up, went to the bathroom, did what he needed to do, and stepped out. The only light in the cabin came from the TV in the living room, but it was bright enough to illuminate most of the space, including part of the hallway. As he opened the bathroom door, he saw his wife walking toward the kitchen. Figuring she had woken up hungry, he started to follow her. But when she reached the end of the hallway, she slightly turned toward the kitchen, then suddenly sprinted into it at an impossible speed, faster than any person could ever move. She was wearing a long, flowing white nightgown similar to the one his wife had worn to bed, and her hair, which reached just past her shoulders, looked the same. Feeling unsettled, he backed up a few steps and peeked into the bedroom where his wife and stepdaughter were sleeping, only to find both of them still sound asleep in bed. He barely got any sleep after that. At sunrise, they packed up and left. Later, he called the owner of the cabin and said, "Hey, "You never mentioned this place was haunted." The owner simply replied, "Oh, so you saw her, huh?" My cousin hadn't even said he had seen a woman, which confirmed the owner knew exactly what he had encountered. He later admitted that if the figure had turned to look at him, he probably would have lost control of whatever was left in his stomach at that moment. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend who... About 7 years ago, during a weekend trip, my wife, Lisa, and our 3 little boys were staying at the family cabin we had bought about half a year earlier. From the very first day, we noticed strange shadows, flickering lights, and odd movements around the place. Everyone went to bed at around 10:30 that night, and I slipped into the kitchen to sneak a piece of the homemade brownies Lisa had baked earlier. As I was cutting a slice, I suddenly heard a soft female voice whisper, "Hey, what are you doing in here?" The sound sent chills down my spine. Without thinking, I called out, "Lisa?" without even turning around. But when I finally looked, there was no one there. Shrugging it off, I went back to cutting the brownie when the voice came again, louder and clearer this time. "Hey, are you going to eat a brownie? I want one." I froze, quickly scanning the room, but there was no one in sight. My heart raced as I hurried back to the bedroom and jumped into bed. Lisa was still awake, and it was obvious she hadn't been in the kitchen asking for brownies. After about 10 minutes, I forced myself to return to clean up my mess. This time, I didn't hear anything unusual. The following night, everything seemed quiet until I got into bed. Lying on my side, I suddenly felt a small tug on my sleeve. As I turned my head, I heard a faint whisper, "Mom, Dad." I shot up and quickly checked on the kids, but they were all sound asleep. I also heard more soft murmuring, but the words weren't clear. That night, I set up a voice recorder in the kitchen and let it run until morning. I still haven't gone through the recording, but a part of me wonders if it was possible for someone to have been whispering through the vents. However, our cabin sits on a remote, isolated road, with only a few empty cabins scattered nearby. If it were a prank, it would have taken serious effort, but who really knows? #### side story. A close friend of mine once told me something that happened to him as a kid. He was spending the night at his family's cabin when, out of nowhere, a woman, clearly intoxicated and high on something, wandered up in the dark and started whispering through the wooden fence slats. He woke up to find a pale, ghostly face just inches away, murmuring unintelligible words. Being young at the time, he was absolutely horrified, as anyone would be. This is my uncle's story.